Hey guys, it's the Friction here, Tank12, however you wanna call me, I don't really care. And today we are taking a look at one of the two new nations that will be coming to World of Tanks, and that is Italy, the land of pizza and spaghetti and so much more. Not just food related, but that doesn't really come to my head right now. So, the other nation that will be introduced in 2018 is going to be Poland. Very interesting nations, for my opinion. And I think they really do fit into the game. Obviously, Italy being one of the main antagonists in the war and then changing sides in 1943 after the Allies landed in Sicily and in southern Italy. And Poland, obviously, being occupied at the very start of the war, the first nation that goes to war against Germany, against the Third Reich, or actually as being attacked by the Third Reich, because let's face it, that was a surprise attack, and there was no declaration of war. It was a very cunning move by Hitler, and Poland was thus subsequently split in the middle between the Soviet Union and the Third Reich. So Poland obviously is going to be very interesting because I know it's very tragic what happened. I know it's history, and we have to go look at these things very respectfully. But I think it's very interesting to see how they will fit into this game because their tank program has probably not really expanded after 1939 because they were attacked and occupied, and they would not have an institution that could like innovate their tanks because obviously they were occupied under German rule and Soviet rule, afterwards completely under German rule, and then up until 1944 when the Soviets came back in and liberated them. But liberating, that is another word. Poles and Russians or Soviets, they hated themselves back in the day. They still do because there were some situations like when they cleared out the Warsaw Ghetto. There was an uprising in 1944. The Soviet army was actually one Soviet army was very close to Warsaw, but they were ordered to halt and not intervene, and thus the Germans slaughtered a lot of Poles that were instructing the uprising. And I mean, ever since then, history has been very bad. I mean, it's been a harsh mistress. If you look at the facts, the Poles and the Russians, they still do have their feuds ever since the Kiev Rus, like back in the days, medieval ages, when Poland was a big power. And then the Poles have never forgiven the Russians for selling them out to the Germans and occupying their land as well. So very difficult. And politics aside, the history is very varied. But that doesn't really matter. I'm gonna be excited about the tanks that are coming. So historical spotlight. We're gonna get three new tank periods, pretty much. The timid first steps, the catch-up phase, the post-war Western-oriented. So the timid first steps is probably between World War One and World War Two, like the beginning of World War Two. The first few tanks, as they said here, is a lot of the vehicles, or they drew inspiration from the French and copied it. Like the first tank, as in a lot of other tech trees, is going to be a French tank, but it's going to be called the Fiat 3000. Then the catch-up phases where they started to care more about firepower and thicker armor, and it looks like it's the phase like right in the war, maybe mid-war era up until the end of the war, where everyone was trying to produce heavy tanks, big tanks, tanks with big guns. For example, the Joseph Stalin tanks, the IS, the Su 100. All these vehicles that were produced to destroy big enemy armored vehicles, or the M26 Pershing that was actually in combat for just a few months at the end of the war, but still saw a bit of fighting. And obviously, the Italians were trying to get in there as well. But since 1943 came around, they switched sides. It must have been rather difficult because the northern part of Italy was occupied by the Germans, and they defended that against the rolling Allied vehicles and armies in the south. And it was very hard because they were like at the foot of the Alps, and it was really difficult to go to that spot because the terrain was very rugged and very difficult to traverse. So post-war Western oriented. Now this is probably after the war, where people were trying to get their first main battle tanks, and you can see excellent firepower, good angles of depression, and insignificant armor. So no big change there, like a lot of different nations that try to get their tank designs and innovations through making them better and working together, like NATO did with the Leopard, the first, like, I think, what was it, multinational tank design, where they put in all their ideas. And yeah, pretty interesting phase, pretty interesting time. The end of the war, like 50s and 60s, very interesting for pretty much everyone. So, a new premium consumables. It's not gonna be pizza. Woo! It's gonna be spaghetti. That's cool as well. So the tier ones until tier 7. As always, all of these things are subject to change. We don't have any stats, but we can look at the pictures. And what you can see right here, the Fiat 3000 is a blatant copy of the FT17, the M1441. They're like kind of two tanks for this tier, or it might be no, I think there are two tanks, right? Yeah, the M1441 and the L640. They kind of don't resemble the French tanks anymore. That actually, yes, they do. One French tank. I just forgot it. The Char 35 something. It's also a French vehicle that looks very similar to this one. Not as much to this one. It's very rounded, and it was very. Ah, yes, the S35 Somua, or Somua 35, I think it was called. A vehicle that was, for its time, very futuristic. But yeah, they didn't have great enough numbers, like big enough numbers to repel the Germans during the Blitzkrieg in 1940, when France was overtaken by the Germans once more. Um, and yeah, obviously, the Italians still had some of the details that they took over and just integrated into their own tank designs. So these tanks actually fought in northern Africa. Very interesting, because this is where Montgomery was facing off the Italians and Rommel, the Desert Fox. And the Italians used these M1441s rather dominantly, because I remember that reading in a few books that these were like their main tanks in Italy. The M1542, obviously, I think was one of them too. And the P2640 looks like the first real medium tank. It looks more flat and more mobile, bit better armored as well, probably because of the angles that you have, but still, I'm not sure what kind of gun it's going to be. I think it's going to be something along the lines of a 50mm gun. Like tier 4, you can have something like a 75. P43, obviously this one is still very much work in progress because it looks like a plastic tank. But it looks like a real extension of the P2640. A bit taller, I think, but nice looking vehicle as well. Tier 5, then tier 6, the P43 Biz. Like, this is a huge change. All of a sudden, this tank looks very futuristic. It's very flat. Its turret looks extremely different from the other one. While the other one looks like a Panther turret, this one looks like a modern kind of turret with a huge cupola on top. I think this is the phase where they try to go for armor and firepower, because the gun gets increasingly larger. Same for the P43 Ter. That one looks like, this looks like the prototype version of the P43 Ter, but this one looks like the actual product that they produce. I think very cool looking tanks. Very interesting tank design, because the turret at the front, the gun mantle, is rather flat. It does have a bit of an angle, but still rather flat. I think it might be a big weak spot, but we still don't know anything about that. But it's important to keep in mind, tier 7, tier 1 to tier 7 does not get the new feature, the auto reloader, excuse me. They still have single shot guns, so the auto reloader will come at tier 8 and upwards, and that's exactly where the P-44 Pantera jumps in. This is the first auto reloading tank for the Italian tech tree. It has a 90mm gun, and it was developed during the Second World War, but it never reached its final stage. It was only designed, and this tank actually gets a 90mm gun, good depression and mobility, and not that much armor, I think, as they would say. So let's take a look at this tank. It looks very much like a Panther, at least from its hull, and its turret actually does resemble a Panther closely, I think. In my opinion, it looks more like a Panther than anything else. So they obviously allies of the Germans, taking a little bit of the ideas of the Germans. And I mean, it wouldn't be nice to have a Panther on the other side fighting your Panther or an upgraded Panther, but that's kind of the way it goes, right? So, Tier 9, Prototype Standard B. Now, this one looks like a Leopard Prototype A, right? That's basically because it took in it was in the same excuse me, in the same program, and that was in the what was it? In the collaboration where the Germans were trying to get different kind of ideas in, and they all produced different prototypes, and that's where they produced Leopard Prototype A. And this tank resembles a prototype like a Leopard, very similar because they have similar kind of grounds upon which they have been built upon. And you can see in the back, the turret looks very similar, the hull looks very similar. It's a very different gun though still. You can see that the back side of the turret is also like raised a little bit, so you can't really put your gun. You don't have any real gun depression behind you, so that's one of the things that bothered me most about the Prototype A. But still, it looks very similar to the Prototype A, and I'd love to see another Prototype A because I absolutely adore my Prototype A. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting because this tank is going to have the auto reloader system, reloader as the auto reloader system, which will allow you to do quite a bit more than the previous Leopard Prototype A, which was very competitive. I'd love to see how this tank would play with a gun that is with a system that allows you to be very competitive in certain situations, like even more freedom, in my opinion. So this all ends up in the Tier 10 version, the Progetto M40 Mod 65. In 1969, a military delegation from Italy visited Germany to discuss purchasing Leopard tanks. However, not all delegates agreed with the idea of acquiring foreign tanks. The Italian military and constructors outlined their basic wishes: decent depression, cast turret and gun mantlet, and the powerful Mitsubishi engine. Their wishes resulted in the creation of a small, light, mobile, but well-protected tank. During the design process, British and Soviet developments were taken into account. Other than further drawings and blueprints, the tank never went any further, so it's a tank that never was produced. Futuristic form and better gun characteristics with the new mechanics make it possible to fully unleash the skills acquired from the tanks further down the tech tree and the Italian premium. That is the Progetto 35 Mod 40, no, Progetto M, I have no idea, M40 and I think Mod 35. The Progetto M40 Mod 65's good depression and mobility will help you occupy advantageous positions on the battlefield. As a Tier 7 and Tier 8 and Tier 9, the tank performs well at close to medium distances, but the armor isn't something to be relied upon, other than possible bouncing of shells from the hull and the turret. So, it looks like it's going to be a tank that is in the same area as the previous version. It looks very funky because the armor is like angled all around. Even the back part of the tank is angled. It looks really funny. There are probably going to be some bounces, some really annoying ricochets because of its, well, annoying angles. I guess you can play it very interestingly. The turret is, I think, similar to the Russian tank design. because it's very flat and long and kind of rounded like the IS-7. But I think it looks really cool, and I'm really excited to see how this tank does uh, fare on the battlefield. Look at this tank. I mean, I don't know the statistics yet, but it looks like it's going to be. It looks like a competitive tank. I'm not sure how fast it's going to be though, because the protection, it does have better protection than the Leopard. That's for certain. It does have probably better protection as the SB1 because of the angles that are added on this vehicle. So does this mean this tank is going to be slower? Is the new auto reloader like system a benefit or a doubt for this vehicle? Well, it's going to be interesting. And I'm very excited to see the new tanks. I hope you guys did enjoy this as well. We are probably going to see these vehicles after, like in April somewhere, or even later. But still, I think they're going to be great. They're going to be a lot of fun to be played out in the game, and I will inform you if there's anything new. And up until then, keep on tagging and have fun.